Welcome to this explainer. Our whole goal here is to take complex, deeply layered texts and break them down so we can really understand the mechanisms behind the ideas. Okay, so let's just jump right in. Today, we're unpacking a seriously fascinating piece of philosophical and theological literature, Bediuzzaman Said Nursi's The 28th Word. Specifically, we're going to explore a section of this text that tackles a massive, almost mind-bending theological paradox about the afterlife. Basically, Nursi is trying to reconcile the infinite promises of paradise with the fact that, well, human beings seem pretty finite. So how does the math of eternity actually work? Let's take a look. To really wrap our heads around the puzzle Nursi is solving, we first have to look at where this paradox comes from. He opens up by quoting a traditional Islamic hadith, which states, "Some of the people of paradise are given lands as extensive as the world, and thousands of palaces and hundreds of thousands of houris are bestowed on them." Just pause and consider those staggering numbers for a second. We're not talking about a quiet little garden in the suburbs here. The text establishes a scale of reward that is literally planetary for just a single individual. Thousands of palaces, hundreds of thousands of companions. It's massive.
And honestly, that brings us to the core question of this entire explainer. What need has a single person of all these things? And logically, how could this even be possible? Why would one human being ever need an entire world or thousands of palaces entirely to themselves? How could one person even occupy that much space, let alone enjoy it? It sounds totally excessive, right? Well, Nursi anticipates this exact skepticism. He knows that when we hear these descriptions, our brains immediately hit a brick wall, because we're trying to apply the physical laws of our everyday reality to an eternal, boundless state.
Which leads us to Section 1, the scope of humanity and our infinite desires.
To solve this puzzle, Nursi actually starts by looking inward at human psychology, and he draws a pretty stark contrast. He points out that sure, if a human being were basically just a lifeless vegetable, merely a biological entity with a temporary stomach and a simple animal body, then no, they absolutely would not need thousands of palaces. That would be absurd. But Nursi argues that this is a totally reductionist view of who we are. Instead, the text defines man as a comprehensive miracle of power. From this perspective, human beings actually possess an infinite capacity and endless desires that go way, way beyond our basic biological needs.
To put that into perspective, Nursi notes that even right here, in this brief, transitory life, if you were handed absolute rule over the entire world, with all its wealth, all its pleasures, your ambition still wouldn't be satisfied. And why is that? Well, according to the text, it's because humans possess these subtle faculties and spiritual needs that simply cannot fully develop in a temporary world. We have infinite needs that are constantly knocking on the door of infinite mercy. Basically, we are built for eternity, so a finite world is always, inevitably, going to leave us wanting more.
Let's move on to Section 2, the shared garden, exploring perspective and ownership.
To explain how multiple people could possess vast realities without running out of room, Nursi takes us to a very specific physical location, a valley garden in Barla. He asks us to imagine the birds and honeybees flying around the gardens and vineyards there. Now, legally speaking, these gardens have different human owners, but think about a bird. A bird eats maybe a tiny handful of grain for its food, yet it looks out over the vast expanse of the valley and essentially says, "All the gardens and orchards of Barla are my pleasant resorts, where I fly around and enjoy myself." In its own experience, that bird takes absolute possession of the entire region. And honestly, the bird isn't wrong. That is its domain.
So the really crucial logical pivot here is this idea of overlapping ownership. Just because other birds, bees, and humans are sharing that exact same physical space, it doesn't invalidate the first bird's experience of ownership. They aren't competing for the view. In fact, the text argues that the other creatures sharing the space don't negate the experience at all. They actually enhance it. They act as decorations. The presence of others just makes the garden that much more vibrant and beautiful for the individual looking at it.
Now, let's see how this scales up from a bird to a human. Nursi applies this exact same logic to what he calls a true human being. A person can look out at the entire universe and rightfully say, "My Creator made this world a house for me." They can look up and see the sun as their personal reading lamp, the stars as their electric lights, and the earth as a giant flowered carpet rolled out just for them. And again, the billions of other creatures sharing this universe don't ruin this experience. They simply adorn the house like intricate moving decorations.
Which brings us to a really compelling mathematical question posed by the text. If a tiny bird or a human being living in this dense, narrow, and fleeting world can claim power over such a massive sphere, literally claiming the sun and stars as their own, why is the concept of the afterlife so hard to grasp? Nursi is basically asking, how can it be deemed unlikely that a human is given ownership of a property stretching a 500-year distance in a broad eternal abode, if we already intuitively claim the whole universe right here, right now? A 500-year expanse in eternity is just scaling up a principle we already understand.
All right, Section 3, Luminous Beings and the Physics of Multi-Presence.
Okay, but practically speaking, how can one person physically enjoy thousands of palaces at the exact same time? The text answers this by introducing the concept of a luminous being. It defines this as an entity capable of being present in many places in the exact same way at the exact same time. And Nursi uses a brilliant physical analogy for this, the sun. In our dark, narrow world, there's obviously only one sun. But if you lay out 1,000 mirrors on the ground, the sun is entirely present in every single one of them all at once. The restriction of a single physical location is completely bypassed by the nature of light and reflection.
To really ground this theological argument, Nursi rapidly fires off several instances of this multi-presence that he claims are well documented. He mentions the archangel Gabriel being on 1,000 stars and at the divine throne simultaneously. He cites the prophet Muhammad appearing in innumerable places at once. He mentions a group of saints, known as the Abdal, appearing in multiple locations at the exact same time. But if that sounds too esoteric, he brings it right down to our daily experience. Ordinary people just like us can carry out a year's worth of work in a single one-minute dream. Even right now, as you're listening to this, your heart, spirit, and imagination can contact and vividly picture numerous places across the globe all at once.
So, if we take this luminous physics and apply it to the people of paradise, the whole paradox just resolves itself. In an environment that the text describes as unrestricted, broad, and eternal, physical bodies undergo a profound transformation. First, bodies gain the strength and lightness of the spirit. Second, beings gain the swiftness of imagination, meaning you can move and exist essentially at the speed of thought. And third, because of this highly luminous state, a person can literally be in hundreds of thousands of places simultaneously. They can converse with hundreds of thousands of companions and receive pleasure in hundreds of thousands of ways all at once, exactly like that single sun reflecting beautifully in endless mirrors.
And that brings us to Section 4, the Scales of the Mind, a philosophical conclusion.
After building up this grand, almost overwhelming cosmic architecture, Nursi steps back to offer a really humbling philosophical conclusion about our own limits. He encapsulates this with a poignant piece of poetry, saying, "This tiny mind cannot perceive the true meanings, for this scale cannot bear such a weight." What Nursi is imparting here is that, while analogies of birds and gardens and suns can point us in the right direction, our current intellect, our tiny minds, are fundamentally incapable of fully grasping eternal vastness. The scale of human logic as it operates right now in this physical world just isn't built to bear the infinite weight of the realities he's describing.
Which leaves us with a truly fascinating final thought to wrap up this explainer. The text meticulously uses logic to explain the seemingly illogical, only to conclude at the very end that ultimate truth is beyond our current logic entirely. So, I leave you with this. If our minds are indeed too tiny a scale to weigh these vast, eternal truths, how does that change the way we view the limits of our own human imagination today? Are the impossible things we imagine merely restrictions of our current environment, just waiting for a broader reality to be realized? Thanks so much for exploring this with me. Keep wondering, and, as always, keep looking deeper.